hope we'll be able to share with you.
I have them.
I'll be able to explain along the way about what makes us perhaps more vulnerable to stress. We need to know what our vulnerabilities are, how to perhaps extend our resilience as far as stress is concerned, and perhaps most importantly, how to deal or how to invoke some of the coping strategies that are there to help us deal with stress. Stress is probably one of the most significant features that might lead to more significant challenges as far as mental health is concerned. And as Emma mentioned, this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and I think the timing is absolutely brilliant to have this conversation that we're having now. And I would like to see it as somewhat of a conversation. I have information which I'd like to share with you, but at the same time, we would like to field some questions that are pertinent to you, and perhaps if there's anything that I've left out of my personal presentation, you know, you could let me know and we could try and cover that. Perhaps let me give you some introduction then to this idea of the stress, vulnerability, and coping model. But before I do that, one of the greatest challenges that human beings have to deal with is dealing with uncertainty. Uncertainty. There's a famous Hebrew aphorism which says, "Ein simcha kehatarat svekot." There is no joy as great as the resolution of doubt. And we grapple with uncertainty. We like things to be as certain as possible in various aspects of our lives. We saw when Brexit was about to happen, people were already then, although Brexit seems like a walk in the park compared to coronavirus, already Brexit introduced some sort of instability. Exactly what will the United Kingdom be like outside of the European Union, etc., etc. I think many of us would love to return to the simplicity, or the relative simplicity, shall I say, of grappling with some of the issues of Brexit. Now we have a global issue of the coronavirus pandemic, 102 years after the famous 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, and it has introduced an enormous amount of uncertainty. Uncertainty as far as our health is concerned, uncertainty that has infiltrated almost every aspect and dimension of life in general, not even in the United Kingdom, but life all over the world. The economy has had to draw back from its normal functioning because of the restrictions of the coronavirus. That has implications for some of you perhaps directly, for others indirectly, but that has also once again introduced a different dimension of uncertainty that we need to manage and deal with, which simply wasn't present a year ago in all our lives, in the pandemic sense that we're confronting it now. So perhaps, Emma, if you were to bring up the first slide, these are 3 slides from a Project Lily mental health training, which I, together with my colleagues, have drawn up.
Can you see that now?
Yeah, it's right there. I hope everybody else can see it. If anybody cannot, please send a chat to Emma, just to let her know that you're not able to see it. But I expect most people are seeing the slide in front of you just now. Now, this is the water tank analogy for stress, vulnerability, and coping. the water tank actually works exceptionally well in illustrating how we need to deal with stress. But before we even begin with the aspect of stress and how best to manage it, let's just focus a little bit on the vulnerability towards stress. In the metaphor of the water tank, which you see in front of you, there will be different size water tanks. Some people will have a small water tank, which means a relatively small capacity for managing stress, and that would increase the vulnerability towards stress. Somebody may have a medium-sized one, and other people will be fortunate enough to have a large water tank, which in this metaphor represents the ability to deal with a great deal of stress and makes them somewhat less vulnerable to stress in itself. But the most important aspect of this water tank metaphor is that absolutely every single person, independent of the size of their tank, has to manage stress in some way or another. The water level, which you can see indicated by the arrow, represents in this metaphor the stress level. And all of us have to try and keep that level of stress, in this metaphor, the water level, at a reasonable level that makes it manageable for us. If the water level were to increase and overflow, which would mean that we are not managing stress, then that would represent in psychological terms being overwhelmed. The tank overflowing would be psychologically overwhelmed. And so the tank size comes from what I would term nature through nurture. All of us will have a certain amount of genetic input as to how resilient or vulnerable we are towards stress. But most importantly, I think it has to do with nature through nurture. What were the kind of families that we grew up in? What sort of techniques were we exposed to in our parents managing stress, further afield in our mentors and teachers, how they dealt with stress? And all of that will give us some indication of our potential vulnerability towards stress. One question which I would ask somebody who's having an issue with anxiety would be, who else in your family has had similar symptoms along the way? The important thing to remember is that nobody's doomed to any one particular outcome or not. We'll see that there's a tremendous amount of input as far as our decisions are concerned towards managing stress, the attitudes that we have towards stress, and those will lead to very significant outcomes. So even if a person has come from a background where anxiety was at the forefront, people did not manage stress very well, or they came from a very stressful background, such as, God forbid, a wartime situation or something along those lines, or being exposed to terror events at different times in Israel, none of that dooms a person, so to speak, towards suffering from a stress-related illness, but rather we can actually overcome it, which I'll try and illustrate to you as best as possible now. If we could just move on to the next slide, please, Emma.
Do this. There we go.
Okay, so continuing with the water tank analogy, over here now you see that on the left-hand side, indicated by the arrow, there's an inflow pipe. And the inflow pipe represent those external stressors. Stressors are things that cause stress. External stressors which are often beyond our control. No matter how we voted, Brexit is going to happen. no matter how careful we were about our health, or if we threw caution to the wind about our health up until now, we have to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Stressors are very often those sorts of things which are thrust upon us. And when there's a lot of stressors, when there's a great deal of stress, you can imagine in this metaphor the inflow pipe gushing and filling the water levels up very, very fast. At other times, perhaps more normal times than what we're dealing with now, the stressors are reduced and they are more manageable. But if we just look at the situation that we're in right now, independent of anybody's employment status, if we just look at the background, there are massive health concerns. People concerned about getting the coronavirus. There's almost nobody nowadays who doesn't know of somebody who has been affected by the coronavirus in some way. And that's exactly the nature of the pandemic. This is a stressor that we have no direct control over. It's something that happens to us.
And if we overlay with that all the stresses that people have about finding work,
absolutely,
when they perceive that we're going into certainly a recessionary period, jobs vulnerability, that's really where we're focused today, of course.
Absolutely, and the impact of this coronavirus pandemic, albeit a health concern, has had massive direct impact on the economy, with whole areas of the leisure industry completely shutting down. Restaurants, theaters, coffee shops, etc., have all shut down. And so the implications for that, if you imagine that going all the way further down the line as far as suppliers are concerned, dairy farmers, there's a glut of milk on the market because all the lattes are just simply not happening anymore. And that has implications on all of us as far as our employment is concerned, because the tip box are that there may well be a recession ahead. And that's something that's going to compound some of the stressors that we'll be experiencing. One of the challenges is how much we allow this to affect us. Of course, it's going to have significant effects, but how much will it affect our mental health and emotional well-being? And perhaps I'll come back to that after we see the next slide. But just to recap of this slide before we move on to the next one, is that here we have the inflow pipe. As you can see, compared to the previous slide, the water level is rising. On the right-hand side of the water tank, you see very clearly marked low, medium, high, very high. And those are the levels of stress which metaphorically are represented by the water levels. At this particular juncture, with this slide in place, all we have is the inflow pipe, which are the stressors that are affecting us. We'll see as we move, Emma, to the next slide, that it's not just stressors that we're managing. But if you have a look over here at the bottom right-hand side, very accurately representing a water tank, is that we've had in the previous slide the inflow pipe representing the stressors, but now on the bottom right-hand of the slide, you have the outflow pipe, which represents the protective factors, the coping resources. Now, I must tell you all that up until the coronavirus broke, I would typically have said quite confidently that as much as the inflow pipe and the stresses that affect our lives are very often outside of our control, the outflow pipe, which represents protective factors and coping strategies, which we'll come on to now, those are almost inevitably within our control. Whereas lo and behold, here comes the coronavirus, and the government legislates virtually how we're meant to behave, when we're allowed to go out. And a lot of the coping resources that we previously would have had, such as going with a friend to a coffee shop, going to the gym for a workout, meeting people in a nice, green, pretty area in a park, have been restricted up until now. And so the coping resources, in the way that we used to be able to easily access them previously, have also been complicated by the coronavirus restrictions. And that has also, in a number of instances that I'm aware of, increased the water level, because the outflow pipe is now restricted. I can't go to the gym, I can't meet that friend, I can't hug my grandkids or children, I can't meet that very good friend who is a listening ear. And you know, these are things that we now need to address, albeit that thankfully things are being eased as far as some of the restrictions are concerned.
And how should people do that, Jonathan?
Okay, so the protective factors which are represented by the outflow pipe, given the restrictions that we have, we're going to need to use, and I think many people have already been doing this really, is quite a lot of ingenuity and inventiveness. We don't have a gym that we can go to, but people now have been watching videos online of exercise regimens and doing the exercises together with the online instructor. People have, as we're doing now, meeting via Zoom, whereas previously we would have been able to have this as a face-to-face meeting. We're now doing this via Zoom. It's not the same as meeting somebody face-to-face, where you have a great deal of interaction that is now missing as a result of Zoom, but it's the best we have, and it's a good thing to link up with family and friends as much as possible to try and get the kind of support that we can to the best of the availability, the means that we have available to us at this particular time.
I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the screen share for now, because I think we've dealt with the slides, if that's okay.
Right, sure, absolutely, yeah.
Hopefully you're all back in the zone now.
Hi, everyone. So some of those coping resources which we would previously have been able to utilize a gym for a workout, with all the companionship in a way that offers, you know, people to offer you advice, people to offer you encouragements. You may have had a personal trainer in person there. Those are now restricted to us. But nonetheless, we need, as I mentioned before, to use our ingenuity to have that workout as much as possible. Because one of the things that happens when we're stressed for whatever reason is that we go into a sort of partial fight or flight reaction. Or fight or flight is there geared towards us dealing with an actual threat. But because the power of the human mind is so powerful, our imaginations can conjure up a perception of threat, for example, health, the economy, not having a job, bills to pay, all those sorts of things, which are real threats, but they are not a threat to life or limb that should invoke a fight or flight reaction.
And
sorry, Emma.
Right on cue, that was so interesting, and I think it explains very clearly to people some of the behaviours. We have, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Yael, because we want to back this up with some real case studies from people who have really felt this and really lived this, and you know, hear from them what they've done and how they've done it. And I think Yael, you're going to take us forward with this a little bit.
Yes. So can everyone hear me now? I hope I've moved. Okay, so I think on the call today we have Donna Cohen. I can't see you, Donna, but if you can maybe unmute yourself. You're there.
I'm down as Tony for some reason, but I'm Donna.
Great. Hi, Donna.
Hi
So,
there.
I'm going to hand over to Donna in a second, but just by way of background, Donna and I met at one of our events actually about 6 months ago for Work Avenue.
Elle, you're a little bit
to do with defining your second name has been in the scene. I don't know what it is. Sorry. Better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Donna has been thinking about changing career, applying for some new roles. We've been talking about it. And then sort of coronavirus happened, and she found herself being furloughed from the job that she is currently in. And she actually joined us on the first webinar we ran about a month ago about progressing your job search during lockdown. I don't know if many people here today were there that day. And I was really happy to get an email from Donna this week telling me all the things that she has done to try and progress her job search and use her skills during this time. So I thought it would be really great, and Donna has agreed to come and tell everybody a little bit about her experience today. So I will hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Yaela, for that introduction. Whilst I was preparing yesterday, I noticed that there seemed to be two recurring themes running through my recent experience, having been furloughed. The first is to embrace the reality that we're in, and the second is to seize the opportunity. Without a doubt, these are unprecedented times, and who even knew what furlough meant a couple of months ago? For the first month, I have to admit that I found myself at loose end, not really knowing what to do with myself, no structure in my day. Then an email popped into my inbox from Yael, inviting me to a webinar entitled Progressing Your Job Search During Lockdown, which you've just mentioned. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah. To be honest, I wasn't feeling that enthusiastic at the time. I was feeling a bit sluggish. I'm sure a lot of people were. But I decided to give it a go at the last minute. And I have to tell you that after that webinar, everything changed. Particularly at the moment when Emma asked, she's on the edge of her seat, what would you say to employers when they asked you, what did you do during lockdown? Whoa, that was a real wake-up call. I mean, you know, it really made me think. And I have to say, what did you do during the lockdown? It's a question that I repeat to myself every day, honestly. So talking about the opportunities, I'd say that attending the webinar was opportunity number one. Opportunity number two followed as a result. I remember that during one of my one-to-ones with Richard, he suggested that I go on an IT course to improve my IT skills.
Richard is one of our employment advisors, for those of you who don't know. Sorry, Donna, carry on.
No, that's fine, thank you. As we discussed upskilling, he'd sent me a link to an Alison IT course, which was still languishing there. I hadn't done anything about it. But having been on the webinar, it inspired me to get going. So I'm pleased to tell you that I'm over a third of the way through now.
Wow.
I'm on the bit about Excel, which isn't exactly riveting, but I'm hanging on in there. And I'm looking forward to receiving my certificate at the end of this course, which I hope will plug a gap in my CV. Opportunity number three came along when an email popped into my inbox from my shul asking if anyone would like to take part in a podcast. It had to be 5 minutes long, roughly, about anything within reason, as long as it was interesting. I'm just going to give you a bit of background about myself now. My hope, as Yael has just said, was to leave teaching by September and hopefully start a new career in charity management. But the coronavirus and the collapse of the job market has put paid to that at the moment anyway. So I had to embrace the reality that and accept where my main skills lie, which is in language teaching. So I replied to that email and offered Spanish lessons for beginners. And now I'm on my 4th podcast. I I've never done a podcast before, but I have to tell you that I'm loving every minute, and the feedback I've had has been amazing. It's the most popular initiative run by the Shul, and it was really started because everybody is a bit zoomed out, and so people wanted to be able to listen to something while they're out during their 1 hour exercise a day, or doing other things, chores, doing the washing up, ironing. And it's so popular that there's actually a waiting list to go onto this podcast now. And even the rabbi's wife has had to wait until next week to get her turn.
Donna, while you're speaking, one of our delegates on the call has asked whether you're actually being paid for your podcasts.
No, it's voluntary. It's all voluntary, but that's a very good idea. But I wouldn't charge my Shul, but thank you for asking. So I'm very, as there's this long waiting list, the organizer has very kindly allowed me to have a slot every week so that I continue my course until this is over, or whenever really. So the next opportunity came along only a couple of days ago when another interesting email popped into my inbox. So many emails. This time, Yael asked me to share my experiences with you today, and I thought, why not? I'm used to presenting in front of large numbers of people, but I'd never done a webinar before. This is my first one, and I hope I'm doing okay. Thank you. I suppose you could argue that these are perfect opportunities that have just landed on my lap, but I've mentioned 3 opportunities. I haven't mentioned the 97 that I've deleted from my inbox. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that you have to take the opportunities that are going to interest you and are going to be meaningful for you. So I'm no expert, but just a regular job seeker. But what I think I've learned, as Emma said in that webinar, is to reap the lockdown advantages. That is really important. Accept where we are, take the opportunities, strike the iron while it's hot. Like, for example, with that podcast, if I hadn't replied that minute, I wouldn't have had a chance, and now I've got a slot every week, which is really helping me keep focused. It's given me structure to my week, it's given me positivity, good for my self-esteem, and so on. So sure, volunteering is just that, it's unpaid work in response to that attendee's question. But hopefully it's meaningful and has a doubly positive effect on the receiver as well as on the giver. It keeps you busy, and learning keeps your brain active. I know that from my work as a teacher. Anyway, it also stops you about worrying about the current situation, even for a while. And last but not least, imagine how impressive it's going to look on your CV. So I'd just like to finish by saying a massive thank you to everyone at the phenomenal team at Work Avenue for your ongoing encouragement and motivation through all this, before and through all this. I personally, it's meant a lot to me personally, and I'm sure a lot of other participants will agree. So thank you.
Donna, bless you. Thank you very, very much. That was superb. It was a joy to listen to hear your experiences. You know, the times are tough, but you've harnessed it, and the only way to bust through it is to bust through it. And that's just what you have described there, which is quite remarkable. Melanie, I know you have also been talking to another client along the same lines. I would say that if anyone has any questions about what any of us are saying, including our guest presenters, as ever on a webinar, do please put them on the chat. I'm monitoring the chat as we go, very happy to pick up. But I'm going to hand over to Mel, because I think you've also got some real client experience, haven't you?
Lovely, thank you very much. And thank you, Donna. That really was inspirational to everybody. And I don't know whether you were looking round or could while you were talking, but there were lots of smiles on people's faces. So you obviously have really brought some joy to them today. So that's, and to all of us. So that's really good. And I want to tell you about another client who I hope will do the same thing. Her name's Suzanne. She's very happy for me to talk about her experience. And the reason why she's not here today, and I'm talking on her behalf, is because she's got a job. So that's obviously really good news. She's a stage manager. She's been a stage manager for 12 years, working on a variety of shows, from big name shows to operas to plays to pantomimes. And she's been used to working on a contract basis for all that time, but she's not really been out of work for very long. The same work comes up again and again. So every year she would do the same pantomime for 12 years. And when coronavirus hit and this situation hit, she was in a situation for the first time in 12 years where she thought, I just don't know where the next piece of work is coming from. And when I spoke to her a month ago, she was feeling really low. She was, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. She has suffered from depression in the past. She's very open about this and very happy to talk about it in terms of inspiring others to move forward. She went to her doctor and she got and she got medication as well. And she also says that she actually encourages people to do both. Because that got her better. I think, as a lot of people will know, you don't really so easily get better from something like that. And she's left with suffering from anxiety, so she's quite anxious. So obviously this situation just made things 100 times worse. So we met and we talked about what she could possibly do. She was quite pragmatic. She said, look, I'm happy to do anything really. I just need to work. If it means a reduction in salary, I'll go for it, because I'll still be earning something. I'll still be maintaining my self-esteem. I'll still be able to have a reason for getting up in the morning. And I feel it will be temporary. And hopefully, eventually, she will get back to the stage management that she loves. But obviously, none of us know when that will be. And we started talking about her transferable skills, those of project management, administration, communication skills, telephone skills, computer skills, and the kind of things she could do. We also started talking about the current market and the fact that some organisations are recruiting, some are recruiting more heavily than ever before. Now, of course, even if you look at our jobs board, you can see there are some vacancies, there are companies that are recruiting. There aren't as many as there were before, but there are some, and the market is continuing in that vein. So if you start thinking about which organisations will be recruiting, then you stand a better chance of getting something even during these times. We also talked about networking, and she met up with a friend and started talking, whereas quite often we meet with our friends and we don't necessarily talk about our job search. It's something that, particularly if we're feeling a little bit low, we don't tend to talk about it. After our meeting, she started to talk about it a little bit more, because we talked about the fact that it's important to let people know your situation, because they may be able to help you. One particular friend, she was talking about what can she do in these particular times, and she started talking about the coronavirus contact tracing system, which a lot of us will have read about on the news, that we're all going to have this contact tracing through our phones, or those of us who want it. And it's just so happened the friend she was talking to, her boyfriend was recruiting contact tracers. She then got an interview, and as we speak, she's actually training to become a contact tracer. She's feeling in a good place. She's earning minimum wage, a lot less than she was before. But before, she was actually volunteering. So she's been helping somebody with her shopping. In fact, a few people with their shopping and with deliveries. So she's been keeping herself quite busy anyway. And now she feels, look, I'm doing something that's really worthwhile within this situation. Plus, as Donna referred to, she can answer the question, what did you do during lockdown? Which is something that clearly she wants to be able to do. Tips, I asked her about tips that she'd give you in terms of looking forward, knowing that she's somebody who does suffer from anxiety, who has been through depression and really has had a massive knock. And the things she told me were, do one thing per day. You do more if you can, but set yourself a task of one thing, one proactive thing you can do per day. It's very hard when you look at it and you think there's this whole looking for a job thing to do, which is mammoth. Break it down and do one thing, and then you will feel a sense of achievement. She said, there are days when you will feel low. She said there were days that she's had many days where she's cried all day and she hasn't been able to focus on her job search. And some days she still tried to focus on her job search, but really looking back, there was no point. So on those days, don't worry about your job search. I know it's very easy for me to say, but these are the tips that she's saying, looking back. Don't focus on your job search. Go out for a walk. Go and do whatever it is you enjoy doing for the sake of your mental health, to reduce that stress level that Jonathan was talking about so eloquently earlier. Go and just do something smaller that you find easier, like checking a job site or talking to a contact. Volunteer. She really spoke quite highly about the idea of volunteering. And of course, the last thing is brushing up on your CV, looking at cover letters, which is the thing that she said Work Avenue helped mostly with. And so just to finish, the other thing she said is about Work Avenue. Engage with us, talk to us. She found that useful. Certainly, I've worked with some clients where each week they will tell me what they've been doing. And I'm very happy to do that. All of our employment advisors are very happy to do that, to keep in touch with you. But the more you engage with us, the more we can help you. You don't have to do this on your own.
Mel, thank you. It's such again, Suzanne's story is absolutely fascinating and inspirational. There is an outcome to it, which is really marvelous. Whilst you've been talking, a couple of people have messaged me. The more straightforward question is, you mentioned about some industries recruiting more than others. Can you give some examples of that, first of all, please?
So she was starting with supermarkets, very basic, straight away supermarkets. And we actually talked about just taking your CV into a supermarket. Now that's just for the working on the shop floor type jobs. But actually, if you look on, I've looked at quite a few supermarket websites recently, and they're all recruiting for a whole host of other jobs. So have a look and see what they're recruiting for. Look at delivery companies like Deliveroo. Look at the places that are, who's actually supplying the supermarkets. Look again at the contact tracing service. They're still recruiting. I read yesterday they still had another 800 vacancies to fill. I know that's less than they started with, but they have. So that's still there. And just be really proactive about it. Look, who's in the newspapers? Who are you hearing about that's recruiting? And apply to them directly. It will save them going through such a long recruitment process.
Thank you. And there's been another question on the chat, which was slightly more tricky potentially, which is, do we have suggestions for someone who's recently moved to the UK and now obviously in the current situation is really finding it tricky, both practically and emotionally, to navigate a pathway to work? The answer is yes, it is tricky. It's really, really tricky. There's no doubt about it. And what I would say to that is probably engage with us, because your situation and your skills will be very specific to you and your experience. And we will be able to work with you to sort of create a pathway forward, step by step, as Melanie said, I know it sounds stupid, but putting one foot in front of the other and taking steps, setting yourself up to succeed with small steps forward in a pathway that's going to make sense to you. So yes, it's not easy, but I really would like to think that we and other people will certainly be able to help you. Towards the end, if anyone has any questions now, I'll also be talking about ways that you can reach out to Work Avenue. And I should also say that we will be, this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel have another look at it just to keep up and see anything that you may have missed. Together with Jonathan's slides and a list of organisations that we can signpost you to for all manner of expert support, either with mental wellbeing or that are general sites that can help with your job search as well. Jonathan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, just one of the things that generates an enormous amount of stress is the disparity between how we hope things should be and how they actually are. And the greater the disparity between how things should be in our own minds and how they actually are, the more the stress that a person will have to contend with. And just actually dealing with the situation as it is. It is what it is. And not fighting against the situation, but trying to explore with curiosity what possibilities there are in the situation that we find ourselves in. I'm reminded of two things. The one is that I've heard in a couple of courses that I did already some time ago. I haven't had the opportunity to check this out with a fluent Chinese speaker, but it's an often quoted thing. And that is that apparently in Chinese, the pictograms that depict the word crisis is made up of two pictograms. One pictogram on its own means opportunity. And the idea is that within every crisis, there is an opportunity that perhaps needs to be dug deep to uncover, but there's an opportunity there for some expanding into a realm in which perhaps we weren't initially thinking we were going to go down that route, but here's the opportunity that's presented us, and we've heard a couple of examples of that here in this webinar. The other thing is from a completely different background. I once saw an article in National Geographic which was depicting a particular situation in the Arctic Circle and how a particular mammal had arrived there. The background is unimportant at the moment, but there was a strapline to this article which read as follows: the tough survive, but the adaptable prosper. The tough survive, but the adaptable prosper. And we can take one of those two perspectives. The one is that, we're going to grit our teeth, clench our fists, and get through this difficult time, which at times we're all going to probably have to resort to. But if we think in an adaptable way, what possibilities are arising as a result of the peculiar and unusual, extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in? And it's almost like that famous book from the 90s, I think it was, called Who Moved My Cheese, which was about change management. And it was once again a kind of a metaphor of these mice looking for their cheese in the usual place where the cheese had moved. And it takes tremendous courage and tremendous bravery for everybody and for anybody to be looking for employment, most particularly at this time, but to use that courage to venture perhaps past our usual framework, to extend the envelope, as they say, to move a little bit beyond our comfort zone, and actually opportunity through adaptability might be there waiting for us to uncover it.
Thank you. Very, very true. There's one question that I would that has also come in from someone on the webinar today, and they ask, is it worth applying for jobs on various job boards? One or two have been named, but on a job board, and you send your CV and you apply to a job on a job board, and it goes into the ether. You don't hear anything more. No one acknowledges. You don't know what happens. You certainly don't get a positive response or even a negative response. it's not great for your mental well-being when that happens, you know. Melanie, what are your thoughts about that?
So I think the thing with these job sites is you can't live with them and you can't live without them. So you want to spend some of your time applying for these jobs, but in the knowledge that that's not always the most effective way. And I think I often talk to clients who have sent applications off through these search engines, and it's almost like you just put it into a black hole and it just disappears and you never ever see it again. And certainly I spoke to a recruiter the other day who advertises on LinkedIn, and I said to her, I said, how do you decide, you know, how do you go through, how do you shortlist when you have 300 applications? And she said, in all honesty, I go through them. She said, and when I find enough to interview, I interview them and I stop looking. So the truth is, sometimes your application may not even get looked at. So what I would say is, spend maybe 25% of your time sending off applications through agencies at most. Spend the rest of your time thinking about where you really want to work, who do you want to work for, and applying speculatively. Make some speculative applications, do some research, and apply to the managers of departments you'd really like to work in. Most importantly, have your network. Who do you know? Who might be able to help you? Through LinkedIn. We talked about LinkedIn on the previous webinar for those of you who were here, and those are also all available on our YouTube.
We may talk about it again on another webinar.
Right, yes, we will. We will. But that, if you missed it, then those are also available on our YouTube channel. And of course, we'll always meet with you one-to-one and talk further anyway. But use your LinkedIn, use your own network, and talk to people about what you're looking to do. Have a version of your elevator pitch, which really is just a shorthand for saying, what do you do? And build relationships and talk to people and ask people, who do you know who works in insurance if you're looking to work in insurance? Don't be afraid to ask. And if you are going to apply for those search engines, through those search engines, I think LinkedIn is probably the better one. But have a look, who do you know who works perhaps in that organisation, or who knows somebody else who works? The overall advice is don't just do that.
I think that's really, really good advice. Use, you know, concentrate on what's going to bring about positive outcomes. But I would also say, when it comes to talking about job boards, the necessary evil, as Melanie said, we can't live without them, we can't live with them. If you don't hear anything, it feels horribly personal, because it's me that isn't getting the response, and it feels like you're not being responded to personally. Honestly, the truth is you're not. They genuinely have no idea who you are. Your CV is actually simply if indeed your CV has even been viewed, you are simply a piece of data, which is a horrible, horrible thing to say. But it can be reassuring. It genuinely is not personal. You know, brush it off. Don't let it, seriously, don't let it affect you too much, because it's not a personal response to you. It's a system with algorithms very often, behaving like a system with algorithms. And concentrate, as Melanie said, on doing those things that are going to lead to the more positive, productive outcomes for your job search one way and another.
Can I just add that if you are going to apply through those search engines, there is absolutely no point in just sending the same CV to everybody. I think sometimes it looks like an easy way out. Just send my CV to lots of places and I've done what I need to do. You really have to be very specific to the job to get shortlisted. There will be automated software that picks up keywords. And so if you are going to spend time on it, spend time on it. Don't just do it sort of, oh, because I feel like I've done something then.
I've been asked the question by somebody who basically is self-isolating at the moment to protect themselves or protect someone that they're living with. So are there filters on job sites for working from home? In other words, that you can make your job search about home working more straightforward. And as I understand it, the simple answer to that is sometimes. Not every job site will have those filters, but some of them do have roles very, very designated for home working. So look around and you will find certain opportunities are designated for home working and are able to be filtered as such, depending upon the website. Particularly, I've found this on part-time websites, because very often more flexible working arrangements expect that a proportion, if not all of the time, may be spent in the home environment. So they're geared up for that being one of their filters. So do look around for that if you'd like to. We're into the very, very closing couple of minutes of our webinar. I'm sure there were many, many more areas that we could have spoken about this afternoon. And I apologise that an hour never quite seems long enough to cover everything we need to and want to cover. What I would say to you is that in many ways, the lockdown has made no difference to the work that me and my colleagues do at Work Avenue. We are as available to you now as we were before. In fact, I would actually venture to say we are more available, because we are working more flexibly, and my colleagues and I are offering appointments, one-on-one appointments, to talk to us during the normal office hours that we used to do it, but also in evening hours occasionally, and even on a Sunday. At the moment. So please, please, as Melanie said earlier, the more you reach out to us, the more we are able to reach back, work with you, and proactively grow, help, and develop your own personal pathway in a really warm and supported way towards the workplace. I wish we could make guarantees. I wish we could say to you, stick with us and you will have a job by Monday morning. Well, Monday's a bank holiday, so that isn't possible. But we can't make those guarantees, because it's just not possible. We can say to you, however, stick with us, and we will do everything we can to narrow the odds in your favour and make it more and more likely that a positive outcome to your job search is possible and even probable in certain instances. So please, please. Now, the way you reach out to us is either by picking up the phone to us. Our number is 020-8371 3280. Alternatively, if you visit our website, which is theworkavenue.org.uk, that's theworkavenue.org.uk/meeting MEETING. You can do it online. You don't even have to pick up the phone to us. It ends up in exactly the same place, and we will respond to it as soon as we can. Melanie's just put those links up. Someone has just asked, will we be holding a CV, a webinar on the CV? Yes, we will, in 2 weeks' time. Our next webinar in 2 weeks' time. That wasn't a plan, that was an honest question, but it is actually on the CV. And someone else has asked if we can help with supporting statements. The answer is yes, we can. All of these things are possible. Anything to do with any aspect of your job search is possible. To the question somebody has asked me about own business support, the answer again, unsurprisingly, is yes, we can help you. If you ring our office number, that's 020-8371 3280, or visit our website /meeting, we can give help on entrepreneurship, employment, starting your own business, growing a business, getting a job, upskilling, career pathways, all of the above, and we're really, really happy to help. This webinar will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow, so I thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Jonathan, I thank you in particular for taking the time out of your schedule to join us.
My pleasure.
I hope you found this all helpful. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time to talk about the CV. And I thank you all so much for your inclusion and your engagement with us this afternoon. Many thanks to you all. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.